Hello, this is Jurgen Appelo, Europe's famous coffee diva, and I am happy to be on the Agile Uprising Podcast.
Hey, hello, welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising Podcast. I am Andy Cleff, and I am so delighted to be joined by three members of our Discord server who I'll ask to introduce themselves, alphabetically by first name. Can you do that this early in the day? Tell us where you are, a little bit about your background, and then I'll introduce our guest.
Hi, so it took me a while to realize I'm the first one. Claudia Orozco Gomez, and I am an Agile coach who's based in France, but originally from the States. I'll pass it on to
Niklas. Yes, okay, so hello everyone. My name is Niklas Kari, and as my accent probably gives away, I'm not from North America, I'm from Finland. And I work with helping companies to get the business benefits from agile ways of working. So on to you, Stephen.
Hey, Stephen Kellogg in the US, and I currently do fractional CTO, CIO work with small to medium-sized businesses.
All of us met through the Agile Uprising Discord server. Is this the first time that you've seen each other's real faces? Not your Discord avatar?
That is correct, at least for me.
Niklas and I were talking about it just before we started recording, but he and I hadn't seen each other before, so it's a first.
Same. I think Claudia and I are there. You're the only one I've seen, been on podcasts with, etc.
We are all delighted to have back on the show Jurgen Appelo. The last time you were on a show was, it feels like a decade ago, April 2018. We talked about agility scales. Prior to that, you and I had a coffee in Philadelphia like 100 years ago, where we met with
Ken Lum.
Behind the Happy Melly.
Happy Melly, the Melly Show picture. Yep.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm feeling great.
What have you been up to? A lot of stuff, right?
Well, I survived COVID, apparently. I'm still here. So I used the last 1.5 years to do a lot of experiments, run a lot of tests of business ideas. Some things worked, many things did not work, and that's what tests are for. So I used that as you could say, the divergent phase of design thinking the last 1.5 years. And I am right now sort of switching to the convergent phase. I've figured out what works and what doesn't. Now I need to double down on the things that deserve my focus.
Nice. We wanted to talk about the unFIX model that you published not too long ago. You mentioned you drew on the work of many other people, took that divergent thinking and converged it. What were some of the key inspirations for the model?
Well, first of all, I spent some time writing this book, Startup, Scale Up, Screw Up, 2-3 years ago, that I basically used to travel around Europe and visit cool companies, such as Spotify in Stockholm, and Flixbus in Berlin, and TransferWise in Tallinn, and Typeform in Barcelona, and many others. We have quite a few fascinating scale-ups here in Europe that we can be proud of, in my opinion. And what I noticed, I wrote about a lot of things that I saw in my book. But one thing that did not turn up in my book was basically the pattern that 3 or 4 people were leading a tribe or a business unit that was scaling very fast. They were like the managers, the chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
The line managers were basically everyone. And then there was this number of people of up to maybe 150 that were very chaotic, very anarchistic, but they got things done really, really fast. And that pattern sort of ended up in what I now call the unFIX model. One of the key things is do not have line management anywhere on any of the teams, on any of the chapters or forums, or anywhere else, because as soon as you have line managers, you have territories. And they will try to protect those territories because you gave them something that they own, basically. So that's one of the insights that I had. Okay, so this seems to work for scale-ups. Keep the line management part out. And with that, I mean compensation, hiring, firing. That's what I call line management, functional management, who decides how much I get paid, basically. Keep that out of the teams, keep that out of the chapters or forums, as I said, and then let a lot of things self-organize. So that's one difference with the Spotify model, if I may point it out, because there the chapter leads, as described in the original Spotify model, are the line managers of the people in their chapter. And then you have a matrix. Then you have a matrix organization. And if you just Google for matrix organizations, you'll find a lot of people complaining about those structures where people have well, practically multiple managers. I have worked on a matrix organization quite a while ago. It was a big company in the Netherlands. I was just an ordinary software engineer. And I had a line manager in one part of the organization who decided how much I got paid and whether or not I got a raise and a promotion. And someone else was the project manager that I reported to. They didn't even know each other, those two people. They were from completely different parts of the organization. In my case, it wasn't much of a problem. There was no conflict or whatever. But I know some people have ended up in pretty bad situations because their managers didn't agree. They're being pulled in different directions. And I thought, that's just not the way to go. There are some people trying to make matrix organizations work, but why bother if you can get around it?
Yeah. I want to dive into that some more because we, about a month ago, did a podcast with Esther Derby where we talked about the myth of the annual performance review and how counterproductive it is. And one of the things that emerged was separate out promotion, raise, compensation from the feedback mechanism. And I'd love to dive in deeper in a minute, but I want to pass the mic over to any one of you. Claudia, what questions come to mind? We did some pre-gaming. We have some really stump Jurgen questions coming up.
Well, I don't know if it's along the lines of the stump Jurgen, but I want to dive into the whole chief aspect because you talked about them as a management team. So I wanted to see if maybe you could describe a little more on in practice how you've seen this, a group of roughly 3 people. How do they stay on the same page? Because we're seeing a whole group of the whole organization will report to these chiefs. So how do they ensure they're aligned more or less?
Good question. So maybe we should first go back to describing a little bit what else I mean with the unFIX model, because we just jumped right in the middle.
Right. If we could describe this pretty picture.
For those for the listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, for me, I call that a base. You call it a tribe or a business unit or whatever. But there's a group of people of up to 150. There's quite a bit of consensus around that number in social science. Of up to 150 people who are focused along a domain, a business domain, or a kind of customer, or whatever. And if you have fast-growing startups, small scale-ups, that could be the entire company, right? That could be 100 people. That is the company, basically. That would be one base. And we'll get into some other things soon, I hope, about fluidity of teams, dynamic reteaming and such. But what I saw again and again, and it's strange that somehow didn't end up in my book, was that those couple of people who were managing that as a management team, they were usually like one product person, one marketing person, one technical person, or something like that. The roles could differ a bit, but it was usually 3 or 4 people. It could be more if it is a significant organization, but basically what they're responsible for was setting direction, indeed, alignment of that base, of that tribe, of that business unit, and deciding who gets hired and who gets paid how much. But they're not involved in all the day-to-day work, because that's what you have all the crews for, the captains on the teams or whatever, who do not have the decision power of who gets paid how much. They focus on what is the work that needs to get done. So I think this beautifully can merge with OKRs, for example. You have your objective and key results at the base level. That's what those 3, 4, or 5 people, those chiefs, are responsible for. The management team, they set the direction, they define not only the objective, but also the key results, how they're going to measure themselves as a base, as a business unit. And then they invite everyone else in that base to come up with their own OKRs and see how they are going to contribute to making the base successful. So I think the whole OKRs principle paradigm is orthogonal, basically, to what I suggest with unFIX. That's just the organizational structure that I described. I described nothing in terms of the flow of work, the objectives, etc. To basically to keep that separate. You can combine it with almost anything. So I think that is one example of how you could do the alignment of the business. Just adopt OKRs. It seems to be a pretty powerful framework.
All right.
Let me jump in real quick, Andy. So because it may be helpful for people to know that the URL to get the visual that goes along with the conversation is shiftup.work/unFIX-model. And we should probably put that in the notes too. But
I love the idea of shared goals. And your question, Claudia, when you have these 3 different people, common shared OKRs at a very high level, gets rid of some of that perverse incentives that came from multiple, that you described, Jurgen, separate silos with separate OKRs, right? My goal is X. Well, that competes with your goal. But when you make them part of the same team,
yeah,
they have a shared fate through these shared goals. I love it.
Exactly. So that's my point with the matrix models out there. People report to multiple managers, could be a functional manager and a project manager. They have different objectives. They don't even know each other sometimes, as I've experienced. So people are pulled into different directions. In my suggested model, even though 2 people on the same team could have different direct managers on the management team, they form one team anyways, that management team. So they have one objective. That's the whole idea, that they work towards the same thing. So it's much easier to have conflict or anything else bubble up to the management team layer and get them to resolve things that cannot be resolved on the teams, because they're also a team up there, one level higher. Much easier to get them to agree on something, and also, as I said, on a crew, as I call them, on a team, you would not have line management, but there can and I think should be a captain, someone who has a leading role. You could also call them a lead, a product lead, or whatever. Who does not have line management responsibility, but those definitely should sense what is happening. They are co-responsible for getting feedback about how everyone is performing, open and transparently. That is, I think, exactly also what Astor Derby suggests, and many others. Keep the compensation separate from the feedback. Feedback should be as transparent as possible. We are now living in an age where information is transparent. We know how everything happened, what happened with whom. The data is there. Just make sure that the chiefs have the data, the information, then they make the decision decisions, and the people on the teams, they're just responsible for reporting whatever has happened and let them figure it out at the management team level, who then deserves a raise or promotion or whatever. That's not the concern for people working on the teams.
So we're assuming here that people communicate well.
Yes, of course. Everything starts or falls with proper organizational culture. Yes, there's no organizational structure that can survive a bad culture, for sure.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to ask you about the captains on the cruise. So if you would have an organization that does, for instance, Scrum, and they have the product owners, they have the Scrum master in every team, and they said, okay, this unFIX model, it makes a lot of sense. Let's implement it. How would you think about in that case? Would the product owner become the captain for the crew, or would it be the Scrum master, or would it be a new role and maybe they don't need the Scrum master and product owner anymore? How would you map it into the Scrum world?
Yeah, good question. So the mapping, it will be a responsibility for not just me, but everyone else out there. How does this map to what we are doing? But let's use Scrum as an example. Let's first roll back to why I suggest this. I have been part of a team that was so self-organized that they did not have a lead or whatever to the outside world, and that was super frustrating for me, because whenever I wanted to have a meeting with them, it took them 2 weeks at least for them to self-organize and come up with a date that all of the team members could participate on the meeting. And I had exactly the same message just a week ago from in a workshop in France, where someone said, I had that with 20 people. They were super self-organized. It was impossible just to speak with them, because all of them wanted to be on the call. I had a workshop last week, and someone said they had exactly the same problem with 20 people who were so self-organized, they had no proxy to the outside world. Super difficult to get a meeting with them. And that's all well meant, but can you imagine that an airline tries to make a call with a plane, and they have to get all the pilots and the stewards and stewardesses into the cockpit, and only then they can take the call? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? Someone needs to be the point of contact with the outside world. I call that the captain. Now, you can talk about how does this captain role get picked? Well, there are plenty of options. It would be super cool if the crew did the picking themselves, democratically or whatever. You will be our ambassador to the outside world, for example. I sometimes joke and say we also do not send half of our country as ambassadors to China. We send just 1 or 2 people who are the ambassador. That's much more workable solution. So you need to have an ambassador to the outside world. But in traditional organizations, in the beginning, it could be someone who is assigned. In airlines, the pilots are assigned by the organization, of course. You could follow delegation levels. You begin with the captain who is assigned in the traditional way, but once everything's working fine, over a period of time, this could become a more democratically selected person. Now, going back to the question of how does that map to Scrum, well, I think most obvious would be a product owner, because that person is dedicated to the product and the team or crew that works on it. A Scrum Master usually is a more temporary engagement, I think. The goal of the Scrum Master is to make themselves not needed anymore, because they have more an agile coaching mindset. So into talking in the terminology of team topologies, the Scrum Masters would logically be an enabling team. They could have a temporary engagement with Scrum teams until the teams fly and they can do it all themselves, but the product owner will always be there.
Right.
So I think the product owner would be a logical person to select as a chief in that context.
kind of like how you describe it, it's also like a liaison like role. So you could like, think about it differently, like the product owner just lead the product and someone else will be the person like making those contacts. So it's kind of like up to the team also how to think about that.
Yes, definitely. You could also say, well, we split that captain role into different domains. When it is product stuff, it is this person doing the conversation. When it is technical stuff, we have a technical lead who talks with architects outside of the crew or whatever. Of course, that makes sense.
I'm sensing some synchronicity with sociocracy and circles and circle leads that, not to be confused with holacracy, completely different ocracy, but sociocracy in its purest sense, circles with clear domains that are part of other circles with clear leads that interact with other subcircles and circles. Was that part of unFIX thinking?
I think it is common sense ending up in multiple models. It just makes little sense to have a self-organizing group be present at every conversation that happens with the outside world. You need some kind of abstraction, a point of contact, an ambassador, a liaison, indeed, depending on the topic at hand. So that's just, for me, it's common sense. And you can argue about the name or the title. I thought captain was a cool word, but some people are allergic to that kind of terminology. So okay, fine, pick something else. That's okay.
So I'll jump in. One of the questions that I guess I was mulling about is one of the issues with a lot of models, especially the older kind of pre-Agile, is you ended up with departmental budgets. And so departmental budgets ended up driving more of no, this is my world, my domain, you can't have these resources, etc. So I can see this can help free that up. I'm curious if you could talk a little more from the business side of how you would lay out budget-wise this kind of division.
Well, I have to be honest, I just published what I had a couple of weeks ago, and this is one of the first conversations I have about the model, but it is all still in development. I still need to think about how do portfolios work? How do programs work? How does budgeting work? So plenty of work to be done. But I thought, hey, I think I have a good starting point. Let's publish this as it is, and then we can continue the conversation and build it out with those who are interested. But having said that, I am inspired by companies such as Hire, where I've been, by the way, in China, in Qingdao, interviewed the CEO, super cool. He wrote the foreword for for the Chinese translation of my book, Management 3.0. And Hire is famous for basically having such units of a few dozen people who are so self-supporting, self-sufficient that they're practically run as mini enterprises, as they call them. They have their own budget, they have their own profit and loss. It's Hire as a company is basically a few thousand little companies that, from most practical points of view, that collaborate with each other for the right to produce certain products and offer certain services to the outside world. Super fascinating to read about that. So I think that would be an awesome way of implementing budgets. Your budget is what you can earn as a base. That's it. That's your budget. And whenever you provide some value to another base, charge them for it. You'll have that's what value units do, right? They charge each other for services. If you do not have such a setup, you'll have a more traditional approach to organizational structure. Yeah, that requires some more thinking, and I'm not there yet. That requires some digging into existing structures and budgeting and portfolio solutions, and see how they map onto unFIX. So I look forward to developing it further.
Yeah, and it seems like this question is often the tricky one too. It's how do you manage money?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, part of what I like is if you think about it from the base, then the three chiefs are responsible, which actually starts blending those departments that are often separate. So if the three chiefs together have to figure out the budget, then they have to work together to make the base successful. So from that perspective, I like it.
Yeah, it could be that I come to the conclusion that there is no other way, that the chiefs need to have responsibility and ownership of the money that they earn, and therefore the money that they can spend. And maybe they need to have need to be able to loan money or whatever from higher management to get investments done in new product development or whatever. But they need budget responsibilities, possibly.
Right.
Otherwise, things may not work at all. But yeah, as I said, Stephen, I'm not there yet. It will come at some point, I'm pretty sure. This is all pretty new as it is.
Just be interested. You're saying it's all relatively new. Well, from the time that we're recording, it's maybe about a month old. So how are you going about evolving or maybe creating this dialogue around unFIX?
Well, first of all, I have a workshop going on. I actually have the next one in a couple of days in Barcelona. So I have conversations with people in my class where we not only talk about unFIX, because that's just 1/12 of the topics in the workshop. Plenty of other things that come to the table. But once I have done that, I have a community, the Shift Up community, where I get people involved, and I actually am planning to do quite a few more company visits again, because last time that I went around Europe was a couple of years ago. Fortunately, travel is slowly getting back to normal. So I hope, fingers crossed, knock on wood, that I can do some fascinating company visits again. I visit those scale ups, maybe some that I visited before, and now more specifically ask for organizational structure issues and solutions that they have, to see what I can absorb in the model that I have. But it's funny that when you see the other models out there, such as, well, the famous one is, of course, SAFe, the Scaled Agile Framework, which has its place in the world. I will not attack SAFe as it is, but I have not heard of any fashionable, trendy, fast-growing company that uses the Scaled Agile Framework. It is, I heard it nowhere across my travels around Europe, visiting the scale-ups of fast-growing companies of a few thousand people. And funny anecdote is last week I saw Dean Laffingwell posting about the cool leaders in the world, that have, the business leaders in the world that have adopted the Scaled Agile Framework. And the first on the list was American Express. That was exactly the company that I fired a day earlier, because their IT is so atrocious, their service is so bad, that I thought, I'm gonna get rid of you. I do not want this credit card anymore. So that was not a good reference as far as I was concerned. So that about SAFe. Spotify model, super cool, but people struggle with the matrix issue of it. But it has some implementations. ING is a famous example. The ING Bank here in the Netherlands supposedly have adopted SAFe with some, a Spotify model with some adaptations. I haven't been there. I read the articles published by the coaches and consultants who have been responsible for it. Looks pretty cool. And I am an happy ING customer myself. I can see that they have made tremendous strides with their with the apps and everything that they offer to customers. So yeah, they did a good job. But I think we can move a step further, and that's basically what I did with unFIX. So I've been inspired by what does not work elsewhere, and coming back to the matrix again, when you do not address line management, who is responsible for who gets paid how much, then by default you end up with a matrix. That's what the result is of the scaled agile framework. It is by design that SAFe does not tackle compensation, because then it would be impossible to implement it anywhere if this required a change. But that means by default you end up with a matrix, because you're not changing the functional lines. You literally overlay another structure, and that's by design in the scaled agile framework. So by design, you end up with a matrix with all the problems that it entails.
Yeah, with the model that you've put forth, there's the ability to sense and respond to new opportunities in the base. I want to talk a little bit more about the concept of stable but not static teams. Wondering how that's being received, what you're finding in these scale ups and startups. You reference Heidi Helfand's book, Dynamic Reteaming. There's also Sandy Mamoli's Creating Great Teams via Self-Selection. These ideas that when you no longer have this forced matrix and people are moving fungible resources, you've got knowledge that can move to where the problems are. How is that working out in the field in the places you've seen?
Well, I would like to go back to the idea of stable teams. We have heard for 20 years that teams need to be stable because it takes them a while to go through this process of the Tuckman model of forming, storming, norming, performing. That's the same thing I've heard 100 times at conferences, and I have never criticized it. It seems so logical. I have noticed it myself as well, of course, in the past. But it also made me think recently, and one of the people who made me think was indeed Heidi Helfand with her book Dynamic Reteaming, but others as well. Jan-Willem Egeling is experimenting with fluid Scrum teams that basically reform with every sprint. There is a new fast agile model. Forgot the author of it, but he also uses open allocation to basically have people self-select in teams on a much more regular basis, depending on the work at hand. So I see these things happening. That's what I'm good at. I see patterns in the world. I see people moving away from this idea that you have your stable team for 3 years, and that's the team that you will be working with. And I thought, yeah, actually, that makes sense, because if we look at another part of what teams do, let's stick to the IT domain, releasing software, we have been speeding this up tremendously. I am so old that I remember that software was released once every year, maybe once every 2 years. And it was very painful to do a software release in the 90s. And then these agile people came along and said, why don't you do it every month? And we were like, what? Are you kidding? Every month? That's insane. Do you know how painful it is? And then people like Martin Fowler said, yeah, if it hurts, do it more often. Sure. That's one of his favorite quotes. When it hurts, do it more often. And then I thought, why should that not apply to reforming as teams? We've been saying for 20 years, it hurts when we change our teams. I've heard people say, don't change your team, because even if one person is replaced, your velocity will drop or your throughput will suffer. And then I think, well, keeping the person on the team is then not a solution, is it? That's the wrong solution. You should figure out, why did velocity drop? What can we do to prevent velocity from dropping and still enable people to move across teams in a more fluid way? Because that makes you a lot more agile if you have addressed that problem. It will be good for people because there are more opportunities for them for self-development. They're not stuck on the same team for years on end. It is good for the responsiveness of the organization, responding to problems. Just imagine that a fire department needs to put out a fire, and they say, well, we're going to form a crew, and first they have to go through forming, storming, norming, performing. That will going to take 2 weeks. Then we'll go and get to the fire. That makes no sense. Sorry, Claudia.
I said, we'll get back to you.
Yeah, we'll get back to you once we've found a crew that has, done some dot voting with each other. No, that's not how it works on a fire department. That's not how it works in a hospital. When they need to do an emergency operation, they work with whoever is available, and they will form a team right there, right then. It's the same with a news crew that needs to go into a city to report on, I don't know, a terrorist attack or whatever as has happened in London, and there needs to be a news item at 8 o'clock in the night. Okay, which cameraman do we have? Which microphone, audio person, which interviewer? Come back with a news item. They don't have time to go through the Tuckman model for a couple of hours. So it's a known and solved problem in other domains. You have a base of people. They know how to work with each other because they have shared procedures, they have standard approaches, they have a shared culture, they know each other across the base, not more than 150 people, they know everyone on a first name basis. And then at the flick of a switch, they can form a team and they can gel almost instantly. That is the ideal situation, of course. Now, I totally understand the question that people have is, okay, but what about the code bases that those teams will be responsible for? You have to sort of swap out some knowledge about this code base that you were responsible for on that crew. You change to another crew, and then you're responsible for another code base, and you have to swap that in. Well, okay, well, swapping things in and out of memory is also a known problem among IT people. We know how that works, and yes, you pay a penalty for that, but it shouldn't cost you several weeks. Then you're doing something wrong, I think. So figure out how to do this faster. And I'm not the first one to suggest this, because Heidi has written about it in her book. Jan Willem is publishing articles on it on Serious Scrum blog, Fluid Teams. I just see the pattern as, okay, hey, this is happening in the Agile community. I think that makes sense to apply. If it hurts, do it more often, also to teams. Let's just get better at it, because if we're able to address that issue, then we can respond to crises and opportunities much faster. I mean, I'm sure you've seen on the news and noticed yourself that Facebook was offline for 6 hours 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'm pretty sure they had to form a crew very, very fast and get that problem solved without going through forming, solving, norming, performing, right? That's the problem. And whether it is this or a ransomware attack or just something that the competition has done and you need to respond to it tomorrow, you need to form a team very fast and respond.
And it seems like you said you're picking up this new pattern, but it is relatively new. And a lot of the examples that you were citing were crisis examples. So how have you seen this happen, or what kind of maturity does it take to have this happen in a regular work setting where there is no crisis? It's a new habit that's forming.
Yeah, good question. Well, first of all, it's not only crises, but also opportunities. I mean, when it is about news crews, there are often opportunities for news items because they need news to broadcast. It's not only about crises, but anything that is worth reporting on. So for me, there's not really a difference between a crisis and an opportunity. It's just something that happens and you want to respond fast. It is this agility, this responsiveness of the organization. And if your speed of response is once every six weeks, as in some other models, then you're pretty slow. You should be able to come up with a team to address some opportunity tomorrow. Now, indeed, this is a solved problem in other domains. It seems to be pretty new in IT. For a change, we're not leading in this area. IT has been leading in other areas, organizational change and agility and whatnot, but dynamic reteaming is new for us, but it is a solved problem elsewhere. So that's good. Then we can look at what they are doing and just learn from them. So that's a win as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how to do this exactly, because I do not have such an organization myself. I just need to, that's my job. I just absorb what I see happening in the world, trying to make sense of it and publish it with pretty pictures.
All right. It sounds like you're saying there's a stimulus. There's something that is asking for a new organization. So it's not necessarily, okay, we're up on our team time. It's been 6 weeks, let's rotate. No, there's some sort of external factor that's creating this need.
Exactly, yeah. It's the environment that it's a cliche because it's true. It is still speeding up. I just read one article after the other that we haven't finished speeding up environmental change. And that has been pushing us to release faster, which is great because now we release software once per week, maybe some organizations many times per day. Once every 4 weeks is now vintage Scrum. In my opinion, that's what we did 20 years ago, right? That was fast then. It is slow now, and the pace is still accelerating. So the responsiveness of the organization in terms of team formation also needs to speed up. It's just the environmental pressure forcing us to, and getting rid of that idea that you pick your team for the next 6 weeks and then that's it. And then after 6 weeks, we might come up with another one. Or it's some organizations, a couple of years that you're stuck with the same team. Again, I don't know all the solutions. I look forward to developing this. There are others leading in this area. I am learning from them. I'm just reporting on this trend that I see happening. And I captured that. I tried to capture it with the model that I offer. I think this is post-COVID the way to go, to learn how to do this. And it doesn't mean that you should, because I'm not saying that you have to change your team every week or so. No, of course not. If it makes sense to stick together for a year or two, by all means, do that. But if you're forced to change tomorrow, you should be able to, because every day you wait is a day too long. It was on the news, reports on how fast the Dutch government responded to COVID-19. And they said just a couple of days delay meant these amounts of deaths that they said the government was responsible for because they were too slow forming a team, responding to a situation that required super fast acting, basically. And well, that's quite an extreme example, but you have something similar in organization. You may not have the luxury to wait a couple of weeks until you have your next BI planning. That might be much too late.
I think we have time for one more question here. So when you published this model, you wrote about like how you kind of what you have been talking about here. You observed some things in the companies you were visiting. You read about dynamic reteam. You read about team topologies, and like somehow like then the pieces started to click together, and that was like the way how you came up with this model. And I had actually very much the same experience, like reading all these things that, and I think everyone in like our Discord server had the same experience that like nothing new in a way, but in a way like all the pieces started clicking together there. But there was one thing that I did not quite understand, so I'll ask about that. unFIX, the name, where does that come from?
We're all curious.
Yeah, good question. So, well, it's time for the big reveal, I suppose. I just looked for a word that sounded good. Like one of the things that SAFE did really well was to call it safe, because that resonates with their target audience. They feel safe with the scaled agile framework. So that's a super smart decision. I thought I need a word that sends the message that I wanted to send. Like, don't get stuck with your organizational structure. You should be able to be very flexible. You should unFIX yourself. So that somehow I ended up with the word fix, also because I was playing with framework and innovation and experimentation. Okay, FIX, fix, let's call it unFIX. And that's sort of how the name clicked together for me. So I could, in retrospect, say that the acronym is the Framework for Innovative Experiences, or something like that, but that is not the most important. We could come up with some kind of other acronym that fits the word. I like unFIX. It fits into the idea that I want to express with the model. I think we had quite a few bad names already out there, so this one is better, in my opinion.
Thanks for the big reveal. Thanks again, Jurgen, for taking the time to chat with us about the unFIX model. If you want to learn more about the unFIX model for versatile organizations, visit shiftup.work/unFIX-model. To join Jurgen on his ShiftUp adventures, visit shiftup.work/join. Thanks also to my co-hosts, Stephen and Niklas and Claudia, fellow members of the Agile Uprising Discord service. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a review or a rating on the podcast platform of your choice. It really helps others find us. If you're first time tuning in, subscribe. If you liked what you heard, share it with a friend, a colleague, a chief, a crew member, a captain. If you want to discuss and share your stories about anything, org dynamics, coffee, join our server. Come to agileuprising.com for links. Finally, support from listeners just like you help us cover our podcast and hosting costs. And for just a small monthly donation, you get a bevy of fun stickers, new ones every month. Until next time, this is the Agile Uprising Podcast, signing out.